Now, addressing racism is going to feel uncomfortable, but that's really how you know you're doing some real work. And people are asking questions, so we're working to answer those questions one by one. Yesterday, we talked about equality versus equity. Today, we're talking about white privilege. Here's a part of our conversation with Dr. Ryan Ross.
When somebody says white privilege, what we're not saying is that white people don't work hard, don't have trials and tribulations, haven't had to overcome things, and haven't earned what it is they have. White privilege is based on a system of automatic, taken for granted advantages that white people have because of policy, because of legislation, and because of the way America and the systems were created.
What are the questions people can ask themselves?
The question is about disparity. In your everyday lived experience, do you have to worry about explaining to your child, why you should or should not go somewhere, or why somebody is going to attack you, or why somebody might ask you why you're in a certain neighborhood? What part of history hasn't been told? And when you begin to read and see some of the things that have happened, you very quickly begin to see that there were systems created to hold other people down. Think about redlining, right? When the government really created areas where investment wouldn't happen, but you've got to acknowledge that it's time to get in the game and get educated. And to be honest, I didn't know. And once you say that, okay, great, now ignorance can no longer be bliss. And now you have the responsibility to not only educate yourselves, but educate and challenge your own circle.
So this can start with a simple Google search or reaching out to the Blair Caldwell African American Research Library. And I think there is an opportunity here for a lot of us to just start reflecting. And I wouldn't be saying this if it wasn't something that I was doing myself. I've talked about racism on this show that I have faced as an Indian American woman, but it's never been violent towards me. And that was a moment I realized that I needed to stop talking, I needed to start listening, and I needed to start educating myself. Better understand these systems and beliefs that have been around for so long that are still allowing people to feel okay about yelling racial slurs, to killing someone because they're different from themselves. This is going to be uncomfortable, and it is time to get used to that if you haven't already. It's also time to just start asking questions about ourselves. Did I grow up with bias? Have I been ignorant about privilege? Identify this, shed it. Let's not pass this along to the next generation. I share some responsibility in this, and I think we all do.